The old ranch road curved like a question mark through the dry Texas soil, its gravel crunching beneath my tires as the dust kicked up behind me. 20 years had passed since I'd last seen the Daniels Ranch, but nothing had changed. Not the slanted fence line that sagged like a tired spine, not the red barn faded to a rusty pink, not even the blackbirds perched like silent sentinels on the telephone wires. What had changed was me. After 30 years in uniform, and a career that took me to war zones, boardrooms, and more than a few backroom policy meetings, I came here looking for one thing: peace. The kind my grandfather used to talk about, when we'd sit on this very porch and drink iced tea under a ceiling fan that wobbled like it was thinking of falling. I parked the truck, cut the engine, and stepped out into the still, dry heat. My boots hit the earth with a soft thud. It smelled like cedar and old hay, like home. I didn't even get to open the cabin door before trouble showed up. A sleek black SUV too shiny for a dirt road pulled up behind my truck and came to a halt. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman in her 50s, immaculately dressed in pastel slacks and a crisp blouse that hadn't seen a wrinkle since it left the dry cleaner. Her hair was styled into an aggressive bob. Her nails gleamed, and around her neck swung a laminated badge that read, Marla Jennings, President, Rolling Hills HOA. She marched toward me with the energy of someone used to being obeyed. "You can't park here," she said without so much as a hello. "This is private land," I replied evenly, pulling my keys from my pocket. "Actually," she snapped, pulling a folder from her oversized handbag, "this property falls under the jurisdiction of the Rolling Hills Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to issue your initial compliance notice." She handed me a paper. It was thick with legalese and clauses I didn't care to read. I raised an eyebrow. "This is my grandfather's land. Has been in our family since 1912. I just inherited it. Be that as it may," she said, tilting her chin. "Your grandfather failed to respond to multiple notifications. The HOA passed an annexation motion last year. You're subject to all community rules. No generators, no livestock, no visible storage units, no non-compliant fencing, and no unsanctioned occupancy." I gave a slow, deliberate blink. "There are 20 acres here, and not a single house from your community touches it." "That may be," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly, "but the boundaries were updated. You'll need to submit an application for occupancy and architectural compliance review. Until then, you're in violation." I took a step closer, folding the paper neatly before placing it back in her folder. "Ms. Jennings," I said slowly, "this land has never been under HOA control. It's not even zoned to residential. If your group tried to absorb it, you've overstepped. Now kindly get off my property." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes: confusion, perhaps, or indignation at not being instantly obeyed. But she covered it quickly with a tight smile. "You'll be hearing from us," she said coldly. "I'm counting on it." She climbed back into her SUV, spun it around with a spray of gravel, and disappeared down the road. I stood for a long moment, watching the dust trail fade against the horizon. Inside the cabin, the air was still musty from disuse. I opened the windows, turned on the generator, and sat down on the porch with a cold drink and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood my ground. But the feeling didn't last. That night, as the sun dipped below the hills and coyotes howled in the distance, I spotted a drone buzzing overhead, small, black, silent dot watching. I smiled grimly and leaned back. In my chair, they didn't know who I was, not yet, but they would. By morning, my cabin looked like it had been tagged by an overzealous meter maid. Fluorescent orange violation stickers clung to the porch posts, barn door, generator, and even my old windmill. A laminated letter zip-tied to the gate rattled in the wind, the HOA seal stamped at the top like some badge of authority. The bolded text read, "Immediate action required. Non-compliance subject to daily fines." I read it twice and tossed it in the burn barrel. They were escalating fast. I wasn't surprised. Bureaucratic bullies always double down when you don't flinch. But I also knew this wasn't just about bylaws and property lines. No, this was about control. Marla's control. She saw my independence as a threat to a fiefdom of perfectly edged lawns and pastel paint codes. She wanted a fight. She was about to get one that afternoon. I found a roadblock at the edge of my drive, 2 orange traffic cones and a cheap plastic sign that read, "Community Beautification Zone. Entry by permit only." It looked official enough to scare off delivery drivers, but flimsy enough to knock over with one slow roll of my bumper, which I did. Less than an hour later, a landscaping crew arrived unannounced. 3 men in neon vests started trimming along my fence line, hacking away at native sagebrush with gas-powered trimmers. When I confronted them, the foreman shrugged. "HOA said you had overgrowth spilling into common space," he said, not meeting my eyes. "There is no common space," I replied. "You're standing on my land." They left, but not before one of them muttered something about getting paid either way. That night, the drone returned. This time it hovered just 10 feet above my truck, camera lens blinking. I held up a flashlight and tracked it until it vanished into the line. Whoever was flying it didn't understand boundaries, or maybe they just didn't care. The next morning, I walked into the Rolling Hills HOA office unannounced. The building was a repurposed model home with floor-to-ceiling windows and the sterile glow of new money. Marla was behind the front desk, a Bluetooth headset clipped to her ear. Typing furiously, she didn't look up. "You need an appointment," she said flatly. "I brought something you'll want to see." That made her pause. I held up an original copy of the Daniels family land grant dated 1912, signed by the state registrar and filed at the county courthouse. Her fingers froze mid-keystroke. "This land," I said, laying the document gently on the counter, "has never been, and legally cannot be, part of Rolling Hills. Your annexation vote, void your letters, ignored your signs and stickers." Trespassing, Marla blinked, then smiled, but her eyes didn't. "The county maps were updated last year. You're in our boundaries now." "No, ma'am," I replied evenly. "Your committee submitted proposed maps. They were never approved. The clerk confirmed it this morning. I checked before I came." A crack formed in her polished facade. She recovered quickly, of course. "You seem very informed for a rancher." "I'm good with paperwork," I said, "and better with pressure." She tapped her nails against the counter, clearly weighing her next move. "You'll be hearing from our legal team," she said finally. "I'm counting on it." As I walked out, I passed a corkboard full of HOA event flyers: pool rule refresher night, mandatory architectural review forum, board game social, the tools of control wrapped in community branding. Marla wasn't just protecting rules, she was guarding a kingdom, and I had just knocked over the first pillar. Back at the ranch, I received my first cease and desist letter by courier, delivered by a visibly embarrassed teenager wearing a Rolling Hills shirt 2 sizes too big. I accepted the envelope, thanked the kid, and handed him a 20 for his trouble. Inside, the letter repeated everything Marla had already said, this time with more jargon and a firm signature from Pendleton, Hurst and Gray, the HOA's legal muscle. It didn't matter, I had seen the game board now. Marla was bluffing, pushing hard, hoping I'd fold before anyone realized the truth. She didn't hold the cards. I did, and I had just started to play. 3 days after receiving the cease and desist letter, I received a second envelope, this one from the county courthouse. It was a notice of pending code violation hearing, initiated by the Rolling Hills HOA. The accusations were laughable: unlawful occupancy, noise disturbance, improper storage of mechanical devices, and, bizarrely, aesthetic whatever that meant. It was a classic pressure tactic, legal smoke, meant to wear me down, but they had underestimated one crucial fact. I wasn't just a rancher before I returned to the Daniels land. I had spent the better part of 3 decades working in military intelligence and rural land use policy. I'd advised governors, testified in federal zoning cases, and chaired committees that rewrote housing development legislation across 5 states. In short, I'd seen every trick in the book and I'd written most of the chapters. Still, I kept quiet. I let Marla make her moves, let her circle, posture, escalate. I documented every drone flyover, every trespassing landscaper, every fabricated violation. I printed screenshots of her HOA newsletters where she referred to me as an unauthorized occupant and safety risk. Her words, not mine. Meanwhile, I made some calls. First, to the county zoning department, confirming again, on record, that my land was classified agricultural and exempt from HOA oversight. Next, to the state's HOA Oversight Committee, a group I had helped found 10 years ago and whose chair I still served as in a consulting role. And finally, to a local law firm I'd once trained in land use litigation. By the time Marla's board received my formal counterfiling, the message was clear. She wasn't dealing with a stubborn rancher. She was up against a sleeping bear. That weekend, Rolling Hills hosted its annual HOA board meeting at Wine and Cheese Affair, where neighbors gathered to complain about mailbox paint shades and unauthorized lawn ornaments. I attended. I wore boots and a collared shirt. I brought a bound packet with copies of land deeds, county survey records, and a letter from the Attorney General's office clarifying HOA boundaries. I waited my turn. Marla stood at the podium, speaking in clipped tones about rising threats to community integrity and the importance of procedural enforcement. She didn't mention me by name, but her eyes kept darting to the back of the room where I stood. When public comments opened, I stepped forward. "My name is Colonel Adam Daniels, retired, 30 years of service. I'm the legal heir and current owner of the Daniels Ranch." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I've remained patient," I continued, "but the HOA has now issued unlawful notices, initiated frivolous legal action, and repeatedly trespassed on private property not under its jurisdiction. This ends now." I placed the packet on the podium. The microphone caught the soft thud. Page 1, my deed. Page 2, zoning map. Page 3, letter from the Oversight Committee. Page 4 through 16, a breakdown of every violation your president has committed since I moved in. I locked eyes with Marla. Her confident smirk had vanished. "I recommend this board cease all enforcement attempts regarding my property, effective immediately. Otherwise, I'll pursue civil damages and, if necessary, criminal charges for harassment, slander, and property rights violations." A man in the second row stood up. "We're sure that Adam Daniels, From the land commission, I gave a small nod. That's right. The room turned silent. Marla opened her mouth, closed it again, and backed away from the podium. After the meeting, several residents approached me, apologizing for how things had gone. Turns out, many weren't fans of Marla's tactics. They'd just been too afraid or too exhausted to push back. But now they saw a crack in her armor, and I planned to split it wide open. Back at the ranch, the silence felt different, not tense but loaded, like the eye of a storm. I knew Marla wouldn't give up easily. People like her didn't bow out quietly. They burned the bridge behind them on the way down. But this time, I wasn't waiting for her next move. I had one of my own. I called the state ethics board and submitted a formal complaint against Marla Jennings for fraudulent annexation attempts and misappropriation of HOA funds used to pursue legal action against a non-member. Then I leaned back, watching the sun dip low behind the hills, and smiled. She wanted a war. She just declared it on a battlefield she didn't understand. It didn't take long for the dominoes to fall. Within a week of my ethics complaint, state investigators showed up at the Rolling Hills HOA office, 2 plainclothes auditors with badges and clipboards, asking for financial records and communications logs. Marla tried to spin it as a routine review, but the truth leaked fast. Her loyal board members grew quiet, then restless, then gone. A neighbor, Ben Callahan, a retired dentist who'd lived in the subdivision for over a decade, called me one evening. "I owe you a drink," he said. "We'd been trying to push her out for years, but no one wanted to go up against her. You did it in a month." I chuckled. "Wasn't personal, seemed personal to her," he replied. "She called an emergency board meeting tonight. Word is, she's stepping down." That night, the HOA members packed into the community clubhouse. No wine, no cheese, just tense faces and folded arms. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The work was done. By morning, Marla Jennings had resigned. Her official reason: health and personal stress. Unofficially, the state was still reviewing her use of HOA funds to hire a private investigator, purchase aerial drones, and print propaganda newsletters labeling me a hostile land invader. All of it, every petty maneuver, now under a microscope. HOA board issued a letter of apology to me, delivered by hand and signed by every sitting member. They acknowledged that the Daniels Ranch was not under HOA jurisdiction, and never had been. I pinned it beside the old family photos in the cabin's entryway. My grandfather would have gotten a kick out of it, but that wasn't the end. After Marla's departure, the new board extended an olive branch, not one soaked in politeness but real collaboration. They asked me to speak at their spring development workshop, not as a guest, but as a consultant. Turns out, once the fear was gone, people wanted guidance, fairness, stability. I accepted that. Spring, I helped them revise their bylaws, removing vague clauses that allowed overreach and rewriting enforcement policies with checks, balances, and clear resident rights. We even created a joint use zone on the border between Rolling Hills and the ranch. I donated a strip of land for a small trail and picnic area. No signs, no fences, no fines, just open land, like my grandfather always wanted. And the residents, they came. They brought their kids to see the goats, their teens to learn how to mend fences, and themselves quietly, curiously, to hear stories of how this ranch had stood through 5 generations and 2 world wars. I didn't lecture. I just let the land speak for itself. As for Marla, she moved quietly. A real estate agent told me she sold her place for a loss and bought a condo 2 counties over. Rumor has it she tried to join another HOA board. They declined. Apparently, they'd done their research. One morning, about 6 months after it all began, I stood on the porch sipping black coffee, watching the sun rise over the hills. Dew glistened on the fence rails. The sky was quiet, peaceful. Then I heard tires crunching the gravel drive. A dusty blue pickup rolled in. Ben Callahan behind the wheel, a cooler in the bed and a newspaper under his arm. He stepped out and grinned. Thought I'd bring the morning headlines. The front page read, "HOA Reform Champion named to State Advisory Board." My name was beneath the headline. I raised an eyebrow. Wasn't planning to go back into politics. Ben laughed. "Too late. Seems like you've been elected again." I didn't answer. I just smiled and looked out at the land. I hadn't come back to start a war. I'd come back to reconnect with where I came from. But sometimes, when people try to erase your roots, you have to plant them deeper and let them grow stronger. Marla thought this land was something to control, but she forgot one simple truth. You can't annex legacy, you can't bulldoze history, and you damn sure can't intimidate a man who's already spent a lifetime defending what's his. So I stayed. Not just on the ranch, but in the fight, not for power, but for peace. And peace, like land, is only worth something when you're willing to stand your ground to keep it.